Good morning, everyone. Please make your way up, and we're going to start in about 30 seconds. Good morning. I cannot tell you just how wonderful it is to have all of you here this morning for our 10th annual Waffles in the Warehouse event. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Kim Wilhelm, and I'm the interim CEO at the Food Bank of Waterloo Region. Welcome. I want to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutrals people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge, contributions, and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land. Looking around the room, I am so happy to see many, many familiar faces, but some new ones as well. Donors, volunteers, agency partners, community program representatives, community leaders, elected officials, or just to name a few, welcome. It is so good to have you. If this is your first time in our distribution center, thank you. I hope everyone attending this morning had an opportunity to catch up with old friends, meet new friends, and enjoy some delicious breakfast. If you're watching from home, hello. And I hope you enjoyed the music this morning by Steve Ashton of the Bulletproof Brothers Band. Before we hear from our keynote speaker, I want to express my sincere appreciation to the incredible community partners who generously helped us make this event come together and be a success. Our presenting sponsor, Air One Heating and Cooling KW. Our breakfast sponsor, Traverse Law. Beverage sponsor, GHD. Mainstage sponsors, Joseph & Co. Inc., Malul Blamey Construction, and the Ray Lipsky Partnership. Program sponsors, 5-9 Solutions and Kitchener Utilities. Table sponsors, Fastenal, Henry Walsler Funeral Home, SG Cunningham, Terry Howell Pools, Woolley Realty Brokerage, our gift sponsors, Cachette Homes and Purelator. Today would not be possible without you. I also want to recognize the more than 120 community programs and agency partners, a part of our community food assistance network, for their tireless efforts over the past year. You are the first line of support for people in need, and without your care, support, and resources, thousands of people in our community would not have the food and supports they need to not only survive, but thrive. We are honored to work with you to ensure that no one in our community goes hungry. I know many of you are familiar with the work that happens here at the food bank, but for those less familiar, I want to take a moment and highlight some of the activities that happen each and every week. On a typical morning, Our distribution center right now would be buzzing with activity. In our engagement room, the area where you arrived, volunteers, corporate groups, and community groups would be sorting thousands of pounds of non-perishable food donations from our generous community. This food is sorted into categories to make it easy for our staff and volunteers to pick and prepare food orders placed by our network agency partners. In our perishable hamper line area, where some of you enjoyed your breakfast this morning, volunteers would be working quickly in an assembly line to pack perishable hampers with fresh produce donated by farmers, grocery stores, and food manufacturers. Each week, volunteers pack more than 1,500 hampers that are distributed across the network to hand out to people in need. I'm so incredibly grateful to our volunteers who last year packed more than 62,000 fresh and 5,000 non-perishable food hampers right here at our facility. In our award-winning Fresh Approaches Food Center, also known as today's Waffles Station, volunteers would be processing, repackaging fresh food donations, extending their lifespan and freshness. Since 2018, more than 436,000 pounds of food has been processed through this center. And recently, thanks to Food Banks Canada, we installed 2 blast freezers. These freezers allow us to process more perishable product. Prior to installing these freezers, our ability to freeze produce was limited by freezer time, constraints, and capacity. Freezing fresh fruits and vegetables could take upwards to 12 hours before they were frozen enough to be packaged for distribution. Now, with these freezers, that time is reduced to 90 minutes. This greatly reduces the time needed to freeze produce and increases the total amount that we can freeze each day. And at the far end of the facility, our staff and volunteer drivers would be loading our refrigerated trucks with food orders destined for our network agency partners. In August, we delivered more than 614,000 pounds of food to our community, who served more than 104,000 meals. This is a 61% increase over the same period last year. Our fleet of 10 refrigerated trucks is on the road 5 days a week to not only cover Waterloo region, but also for the Food Bank Distribution Services catchment area across southwestern Ontario. Last year, our drivers traveled more than 704,000 kilometers to move more than 6 million pounds of food. Although it's not inside, our mobile pantry would be deployed to our network agency partners in Kitchener-Waterloo for their use to distribute fresh, frozen, and non-perishable food items to individuals and families struggling to afford the food that they need. From this short overview, I hope I have given you just a small glimpse of what happens every day at the Food Bank of Waterloo Region. And of course, none of this would be possible without our incredible staff team and volunteers. I see the passion of these individuals each and every day for the work that they do, and I am so proud to work alongside them. One of the questions that I get asked on pretty much a daily basis right now is, what are you seeing right now in the community? Unfortunately, I don't have good news at all. It's a grim picture. And like other food banks in Ontario, we are seeing the highest need for food assistance in our almost 40-year history. Sadly, this means that there are more hungry individuals, families, and children in our community than ever before. 1 in 10 households is accessing a food assistance program in Waterloo Region. That number was 1 in 14 in 2022 and 1 in 20 in 2021. In August, we once again reached record-breaking numbers for those accessing food assistance. There were more than 46,000 visits made to a local food hamper program, a 35% increase over the previous year. Nearly 700 new households accessed a food program for the very first time, more than 67% over the last year. In all, More than 8,000 households were supported by our network. And I can tell you that 37% of this is children. I know that these numbers are shocking, and I expect it's not the last time you're going to hear me speak about record-breaking numbers. The truth is, I don't want to talk about record-breaking numbers anymore. Instead, we need to look through the numbers. We need to see the real people beneath. We need to talk about the post-secondary school student who is homeless and hungry. We need to talk about the single dad struggling to put food on the table for his kids. And we need to talk about the low-income senior who doesn't have enough money to pay their bills after rent. With thousands of people accessing food assistance each month, there are thousands of stories to be told and heard. Over the summer, we asked community members to share personal experience with food insecurity as a participant or a service provider. We want to give hunger a face. I invite my colleague, Melissa Bender, to share some quotes from these stories, highlighting the powerful impact the food bank and our incredible network have in nourishing our community.
Thanks, Kim. Bonnie Jensen, chair of the Trinity Community Table Committee, says, I think we fulfill a very serious need in our community. Once you start volunteering and you meet the guests and you understand what a wonderful thing it is to feed hungry people and to give them a place where they can feel safe and comfortable eating their meals, it's quite compelling. There's something beautiful about pulling all that together. Jess Fry, coordinator of the Waterloo Region Community Health Van, says, we're giving not only the food items, but also the freedom of choice and dignity to pick what they want. I love the pure shock that people have when they get more than they expected. Kitty Eibel says, if it wasn't for the food bank, I wouldn't have been able to graduate. It literally was my lifesaver. Nadine Green, the site coordinator at A Better Tent City, says, there's always something healthy and something you want to eat. Laura Hamilton, a board member with a Better Tent City Board of Directors, says, it's a labor of love. We could not exist without the food bank. Nicole Pereira, program manager at Supportive Housing of Waterloo, says, a lot of our tenants at Supportive Housing of Waterloo are relying more heavily on the food program. I think it's a combination of not only the increasing food costs, but there were a lot of extra supports during the pandemic that came to a halt at the end of COVID. Paulette Williams, a volunteer at Kingdom Community International, says, when I was asked if I would like to volunteer at Kingdom Community International, I didn't hesitate. I was a single parent. I used to use the food bank. I know how helpful it was for me to feed my children. Richard Mitchell says, quite simply, as an adult student and father, without your services, I don't know where I or my children would be. Tyler Collins says, living off ODSP payments, I didn't have much room in my budget to buy food. Food assistance helped me out a lot during those rough times until I could find a job. It helped me survive. Wendy Gale says, I felt connected to the community. Somebody had to make it, somebody had to deliver it. It's not just a food hamper coming to your door. It's a community. It's community in your bag. In your program, you will find 9 QR codes. Each one takes you to our website, where you will find the full version of these powerful stories. I encourage you to take some time to read them.
Thanks, Melissa. By sharing these stories, we hope to raise awareness and educate our community that hunger can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. I also hope you'll see that there is no typical food assistance participant, and there are so many reasons a person may access food, such as a sudden job loss, low income, the rising cost of food, or lack of affordable housing. If you have an eye for detail, you may have noticed that one story listed in our program does not have a QR code, nor does it appear on our website. There's a reason for that. This story is about a Métis chef working at Attendees Cafe and Catering, and how she also became the food and nutrition coordinator at White Owl Native Industry Association, a youth-led nonprofit that provides support and programming to Indigenous people. The story starts in Kitchener, where she was born and raised. The story is about her personal experience growing up in a food insecure household, and as a young child, discovering that her family was not alone, as others in her community were also food insecure. Here to share her story and put a face to hunger is Sydney Keedwell.
Well, hi everyone. I am just blown away at this event today. It's so nice to see so many people here. It's actually my first Waffles in the Warehouse event, and it's just so nice to see, coming from growing up as a child to where I am now, the support, and I think raising awareness with events like these really help people suffering with food insecurity to not feel alone. So I will tell you a little bit more about me. I'm gonna start kind of just when I was young, going up into where I am now, because I'm really proud, not only of where I work with White Owl Native Ancestry, but also the work that we've been doing that I've just joined. It's been going on for a long time. So as you can see, over here, a classic late 90s photo. That's me and my sister Shelby and my late father, Doug. We grew up in Kitchener and in a low-income housing. Because my dad was disabled from a motorcycle accident he had earlier in his life, the complications came back and it left him in a situation where he was a stay-at-home dad. So we lived in a small bungalow, 2 bedrooms, and it was a wheelchair-friendly house. It was very small, and it was in the end of a big complex. So this will make sense more when I tell you the rest of the story. So this is in our kitchen, and right would be in front of us would be our kitchen table. So in front of that kitchen table, we had a nice big window that looked out into the kind of complex. And that leading into my story will tell you, I'd like to tell you the first time I kind of realized that there was an issue with food in my area. So around, I would say probably about 4 years old, I remember this day very clearly. And I was sitting at that table, I was eating my lunch, which was a bowl of chili, and I remember getting up. My dad was in the kitchen, just making food. He liked to spend the day in the kitchen making whatever he could. And I got up from the table and I went to my room and I came back and my dad was facing away, facing the cupboards, and there was a little boy sitting in the seat that I was sitting at, and he was eating the chili out of my bowl as fast as he could. And I was obviously stunned, and I said, Dad? And my dad didn't yell, he didn't tell him to go, he didn't say, what are you doing here? He just pulled me aside, and he said, let him finish it. And I said, well, Dad, what about my food? And he said, don't worry, we have more. And I didn't really understand his reaction. I thought he was going to be upset. We didn't even know this child. It wasn't one of our friends. And he simply just let him finish. And he asked him if he needed anything else. And so he gave him a few snacks out of our cupboard and sent him on his way. So that was one of the first times I could very clearly remember being like, why doesn't he have food at home, Dad? And it just continued to see that pattern go on and on throughout our life. So that memory really stuck with me. And going into, some older grades, I would do things like work in the office during lunch, and I would see how many of my peers would come to the office because they didn't have a lunch. And the school did what they could, but what they would provide was a packet of Ritz crackers filled with cheese, a granola bar, and maybe sometimes a piece of fruit in a juice box. And coming from my household, where I had an understanding that we were food insecure, but I was very lucky and privileged to have my father, who had this wonderful experience as a chef and use those tools to be able to use whatever we received from a food bank or a hamper assistance program to use it to its full potential. So when I say that, I mean that, we would get 2 bags of potatoes delivered to our house. And I would say, well, Dad, what are we going to do with all these potatoes? And he said, watch. And so I'd get in the kitchen with him, we'd wash the potatoes, and he would bake them all in the oven. And he would bake them and then take them out, and he would scoop the insides and turn those into mashed potatoes. He would cut some up and make them into hash browns, similar like the ones we had this morning. And he would use the ones that he scooped out to make into potato skins. And so we would eat those as well. And he would take them all and he would pack them up and freeze them. And not until, I would say, just a few years ago, I didn't realize how grateful I was that he had a skill like that, but also the fact that he was able to teach other people in our community just basic things to make the food that they had last. So then going into my career, I wanted to follow in my dad's footsteps of being a chef. At 17, in my last semester of high school, I left to study at Conestoga College. I did their OEAP program, which I was incredibly grateful for. It basically gave me my high school credits, but also the first year apprenticeship that was condensed into being a chef, which was funded by the government. We, at one point in our lives, didn't know that we would even be able to attend college or university, and it was just something we were so grateful for. So going into that, I worked in multiple restaurants. I saw and I struggled with the amount of waste, the kind of just feeling that we were not putting food to its full potential. The feeling that we were making some, really, popular food, high-end food, people were paying a ton of money, but it wasn't accessible to everyone. So I had made a move to Taco Farm in Waterloo, which is now closed, and that's where I met Nick, who's in that photo there with me and my dad, and he really, him and his wife, Natalie, I should say, really helped change my perspective on food and also the food industry. So what we would do at Taco Farm is not only try and support local farmers as much as we could, we had great relationships with them. They would come and eat with us. We would do events together, and we would also, on the other hand, use compostable or recyclable on more responsible items before it was kind of popular. So they have been using that since they started their first restaurant. That was Nick and Nat's Uptown 21. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but it's been closed for a while. So then at my time at Taco Farm, not only did I really enjoy exploring Mexican cuisine, I tried to reconnect with my heritage. So I'm part settler and Métis. My mom on her side is Métis, and she was, well, this is very common, just was very disconnected from her heritage. She didn't grow up with it, in which a lot of families do, having fear of things like residential schools or just stigma that had gone back a very long time. So during my time there, Nick really encouraged me to try and reconnect and try and see what I could learn. So between that, I found a really awesome link between Mexican food and Indigenous food with a lot of similarities with things like white corn. So you may know it as hominy, or maybe just the corn that they use for flour for tortillas. And through that connection is where I connected with White Owl Native Ancestry. So I think it was maybe 2019. I had a friend call me and say, I work sometimes with this collective, I know them, and they have some corn that has turned into smut, and we thought maybe you'd be able to use it. And I said, well, honestly, I don't know much about it, but let me ask. So at the time, my sous chef was originally from Mexico, and I asked her, and I said, Hilda, do you use this product? And she said, oh yes, this is really popular in Mexico. And I said, well, what is it? And she's like, well, technically it's the mold of corn. And I said, oh, okay. And I was like, well, Hilda, what do you do with it? And she's like, oh, it's really popular with quesadillas. And I said, well, you know what, let's take it. Ironically, I'm very allergic to mold. But it ended up creating such a great connection, which at that time was with Wisak to Winawak, is that youth-based collective that works with White Owl Native Ancestry. And so we took the corn. I didn't process it because, allergies. And it was actually ended up being really popular. So throughout that time, we ended up doing more events with White Owl. And then came kind of the end of COVID, which was a big struggle for me. It was really difficult to navigate in the restaurant with rising food costs. So like, for example, when I first started at Taco Farm in 2018, we were paying 13 cents a liter for oil. By the time I left in 2022, we were paying $1.23 per liter. So many restaurants, as well as individuals, have been really struggling with the rising cost of food. And by 2022, I was feeling very burnt out. I was tired. I was dealing with a lot of frustration from customers, from suppliers, really struggling to work with Nick to make things work. And with not wanting to really rise our food prices, we kind of had to try and compromise where we could. And unfortunately, that led not only Taco Farm, but many businesses throughout COVID to close their doors. So in mid-2022, I spoke with Dave, and I said, who's actually sitting at the front here, I said, I feel like I need something to fill my soul. I feel empty, I feel tired, and I want to do something else. And I told him, I'm not university educated, I don't have a degree, but I'm passionate about food, and I think I can teach people. I teach people basic skills, which I think sometimes is also forgotten when this very crucial part of giving people food, but also I think you need to teach people how to use it, like my dad did. And so I talked to Dave, and we ended up creating this position for me. So in my few months, I started in January of 2023 at White Owl, and since then, we have worked to open Andonjige Cafe, which will hopefully be open part-time in October through our family center. And we are also working on programming to teach people basic skills to utilize food to the best of their ability. Not only that, but also to educate people on how to use traditional foods, which are very, very healthy and important, but also make food boxes that we provide with Wisak to Winawak Collective with food that are from their gardens. So our boxes are slightly unique in the fact that they are focused on fresh produce. So So in the winter, obviously we purchase things to sustain families, but this summer we are so lucky and grateful to pull a lot of great produce out of our gardens. We have 3 in the region that we mostly work out of, and we pulled out great squashes, heritage variety squashes, lots of corn and delicious vegetables that we're able to share and to cook to share with our community. So thank you for listening to my story, but also I want to just mention that my story, although some people say, oh, Sydney, that's really sad. Well, to me, it really molded who I was, and I'm very grateful for everyone that helped us along the way. It wasn't easy. I felt like there was a lot of stigma attached with it, and like Kim said, there isn't a face. There isn't a type of people who need support from the food bank, but just from our program alone, in 2022, before I started, they had about 15 families that they were supporting weekly with these fresh produce boxes. In the beginning of 2023, that number jumped to 30 families. And Indigenous and people of color, like in their households, they're 3 times more likely to face the issues of food insecurity. So I'm really grateful to be able to share my story, but also there is a lot of work to do. We are hearing more staggering numbers, and there's a lot of people struggling to put food on the table. I've noticed even myself going to the grocery store, seeing people have to decide at the cash whether they're gonna bring home diapers or they're gonna bring home produce. I've seen a really horrible amount of people kind of debating taking things off their bill because they can't afford it. And it's going to continue to rise, especially if things like ODSP and other assistance programs aren't matching. So I'm really grateful to be here today, and thank you for listening to my story.
Sydney, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Your personal story puts a face to hunger and is one that is shared by many in our community. Today, you have heard a few of the stories, but what you didn't hear was from the more than 22,000 people who make up the 46,000 visits last month to a food assistance program. That's 22,000 stories in our community. This month is Hunger Action Month, and we support our partners at Feed Ontario and across the province to call on the Ontario government to stop the clawbacks on social assistance. On your way out the door today, please stop and sign your name to a postcard at the door to share how government policies impact people in our community. For those at home, we will also share with you a digital postcard option. For everyone at today's event, whether in person or online, thank you. Before you go, please help me in giving a special shout out to the food bank staff for their hard and tireless work in putting this event together. Every single employee, as well as volunteers, helped in some way. The warehouse looks fantastic, and thank you for all of your hard work. Within minutes of you leaving, this space is going to be transformed back into a busy distribution center. Staff and volunteers will be receiving donations in no time, picking orders for our agency partners, and loading our trucks to safely transport food. Thank you for your support today and helping us make this event a success. Together, We're furthering the conversation and understanding about food insecurity in our community. And because of you, the Food Bank of Waterloo Region can continue to make sure people in our community always have access to food. Big or small, every action we take is one step closer to a Waterloo region where no one is hungry. One last housekeeping note. For those of you who parked at Zares, the shuttle will be leaving shortly. And thank you to Driver Seat for providing the shuttle today. The shuttle will leave once it's full or every 10 minutes after that. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.